Welcome to the McAfee Center Stage webinar series. My name is Nick, and I will be your host. This webinar is a brief overview covering common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing. If assistance is needed, please contact McAfee Technical Support. Our speaker today is Mitchell Buehler. Mitchell is a technical support engineer for the Dynamic Endpoint Group and has been with McAfee since May of 2018. Mitchell provides support for products in the Endpoint AV segment, including Move, ENS, and VSE across all platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, Mitchell.
Thanks, Nick. So in today's webinar, we're going to cover the basics for what you need to know to perform a successful migration from VSE to ENS. Starting with the overview of the migration process, we're going to give you some basic information about the migration, talk about the version check for EPO, and how to analyze your environment with the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant. We're then going to move on to performing the migration, starting with installing the required components, migrating your policies from your legacy software using the Endpoint Migration Assistant, performing a test upgrade on a small subset of systems with the Upgrade Assistant, and then how to move on to the rest of your production environment. Finally, we'll cover some resources that you have if you need some assistance during the migration process. The first section we'll cover is the migration overview. The key things to consider with this migration is to make sure that you're following a good migration workflow. The very first thing you want to start with is the version check of your EPO server to make sure that you're at a version that's compatible with the new software that you're going to be installing, as well as with the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant extensions. The next step is to analyze the environment using the Upgrade Assistant to check for your endpoints, make sure they're all compatible with the new version of the software, and remediate any manual steps or any automated steps that you need to take care of before the upgrade can proceed, and make sure that you have all of the components installed that you need to. And that flows right into the next step, install any required components that you need to perform the migration. Then, once you've analyzed the environment and taken care of everything in the prior steps, you want to make sure to migrate your VSE and other legacy product policies using the Migration Assistant. And once that's been completed, you can do a test upgrade on a small subset of systems to make sure that everything works well. And once that's done, you move to the production and get the rest of your environment upgraded. And we'll start with the very first step, the EPO version check. On this slide, we have some useful KB articles with regards to upgrading your EPO server, as well as some other information for SQL Server and things like that. Realistically, though, if you're on a very old version of EPO, it tends to be easier to stand up a new EPO server and migrate your systems over to that before performing the migration, rather than trying to upgrade from an older version of EPO to the newer version. Key things to keep in mind are that Endpoint Security version 10.7 requires a minimum version of EPO at 5.9 or above, and McAfee Agent 5.05 or higher. The Endpoint Migration Assistant and Endpoint Upgrade Assistant extensions both require that you have at least EPO version 5.3, and with EPO version 5.10 and above, Endpoint Upgrade Assistant actually comes installed by default. If you're using EPO version 5.9 or 5.3, you can actually download the extension from the software manager within EPO. Moving on to step 2, we'll be analyzing your environment using the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant. Endpoint Upgrade Assistant is an EPO extension that really takes a lot of the work out of performing your upgrade to ENS, or migration away from the legacy products. It allows you to, within one tool, analyze your environment. It guides you through the migration process, and it highlights and enables you to take care of everything that's needed in order to make use of the automation. The upgrade automation package that it creates allows you to upgrade from your legacy products to endpoint security, as well as install other products alongside it, all in one easy package in one deployment. We also have a package creator, which we'll demonstrate later, that allows you to create the same sort of upgrade automation package that can be deployed using third-party deployment tools or even EPO if you prefer to do it that way. Once you've opened up the Upgrade Assistant extension, the very first thing that you need to do is select the version of Endpoint Security you plan on upgrading to, and then select the group of systems that you want to analyze. For the purposes of doing your test migration, it's best to select a specific subgroup of systems. From there, once you've selected the Analyze Environment button, you get brought to the very first dashboard that we see on the screen here, where it allows you to view the pie chart of the various systems in the group that you've analyzed and the various states that they're in. You can also see the list of systems that are in each various status. You can also see your analysis history if you click on the pie chart. And you can reanalyze the environment once you've performed some upgrades, and if you made a mistake in selecting the group, you can even start over. This table provides you with an explanation of the various states that a system can be in once you've analyzed the environment with the Upgrade Assistant. Ready to upgrade is the most obvious one. It means that that system's ready to go and can be upgraded with the automation package with no problem. Blocks from upgrading will show up as red on the previous screen, and this means that there's either some manual steps that need to be taken to correct the system, or it doesn't meet the requirements for ENS, and it'll provide a link to documentation explaining why that might be the case. Requires product upgrades is also fairly straightforward. It just means that you need to upgrade some of the legacy software that's installed, or something like the McAfee agent prior to being able to use the upgrade automation package. And once you've reanalyzed the environment and taken care of those things, that system will move to the ready to upgrade state. And upgrade complete, also pretty straightforward. That just means that that system's already running ENS and doesn't need any automation performed on it. The overview panel of the Upgrade Assistant extension shows you more information on the number of systems that are in each state, and selecting more info within each of the state boxes provides you with a list of systems and information regarding those systems as to why they're in that state. Here we have the hardware compatibility requirements for the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant. I'm not going to spend time going over it here, but the latest information is available on our knowledge base article KB 82761. The second panel within the Upgrade Assistant, the Prepare panel, provides you with warnings of tasks that you might need to complete before you go ahead with the migration, such as migrating your policies from VSE first using the Migration Assistant, as well as links to go directly to there, as well as some other information about other products and links to relevant documentation if necessary. Below that, you're able to select the versions of the products that you plan on installing using the Upgrade Automation package. Of the products listed on the packages section of the Prepare panel, the only things that are mandatory to select are platform and threat prevention for endpoint security. Everything else is optional, and if you don't wish for that to be installed, you can select Do Not Install from the dropdown. Now that we've covered the basics of using the Upgrade Assistant to select your products to install and analyze your environment, we're going to perform a demonstration. To get started with the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant and analyze your environment, you first want to start by logging into EPO and then navigating to the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant homepage. And if you haven't opened the extension yet, you'll get to this first screen here where you first select the version of ENS that you want to upgrade to, which in this case we're going to do Endpoint Security 10.7, and then you select the group of systems you'd like to analyze and perform the migration on. In this case, we're going to just select the VSE to ENS migration group. You then click Run Environment Analysis. And you get to this page here. So as we can see here, you'll have your systems that show Upgrade Complete, and you can click on View Systems to see that list of systems. In this case, we have an ENS for Linux system that's already been upgraded, and also just a regular Windows 10 system that's already been upgraded. You can also see your systems that are ready to upgrade. In this case, I have 3 systems here that have VSE installed and are ready to be migrated through whichever method we choose. Now, if you did have any systems that required any products to be upgraded prior to performing the migration, they would show up here, and a similar story would be for any systems that are blocked from upgrading. And clicking on the View Systems link that would be there would provide more information for each of those systems as to why they wouldn't be able to be upgraded. Now, if we were to select product versions here, we'd be taken to a page that shows the version in the environment of each of the legacy products installed, as well as the minimum required version for any of those products. Now, once we're ready to move on, we simply select the Prepare button here, and we can choose the product versions we'd like to install, or for instance, if we don't want to use this product or we don't have it installed, we can just select Do Not Install. So in this case, we are not going to worry about doing any of these products since we are just focusing on endpoint security. And now, at a bare minimum, the platform and threat prevention modules are required, and you can also select to install any of the other available modules during this upgrade. And for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to not install the firewall, but we will install everything else. And that is about all there is to it for the environment analysis portion. We'll continue on through this in the testing the upgrade section. To summarize what we've covered so far, the first steps in the migration overview are to make sure that you check in the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant extension if you're not on EPO 510, analyze the environment using the Upgrade Assistant, and see what state your systems are in and take care of anything as necessary. Then select the versions of the products that you wish to install and identify anything that you need to install to move forward from there. Moving on to the next step once you've analyzed your environment is to install any required components in EPO. After you've verified what components you need, you can install these components either using the software manager or the software catalog within EPO, or you can download them from the McAfee product download site and check them into your master repository manually. For endpoint security specifically, this is a list of all of the files for the packages and extensions that you need. It's pretty straightforward from the download site. Just to make sure that you select the packages filter for when you're downloading the packages, the extensions filter for downloading the extensions. And this is just an example of one specific version and all the files required for that, as well as for the Upgrade Assistant. The next step in the migration workflow is to migrate your VSE and legacy product policies using the Endpoint Migration Assistant. The Endpoint Migration Assistant is an extension that allows you to migrate your legacy policies from products such as VSE, Post-Intrusion Prevention, and Site Advisor Enterprise to their equivalent endpoint security policies, an EPO extension that works for EPO versions 5.3 and above. The Endpoint Migration Assistant provides 2 different ways that you can complete the migration of your policies and client tasks. Automatic migration, which, based on a selected system tree group, migrates all of the policies and client tasks automatically, as well as automatically assigning them after the migration, or manual migration, where you select the individual policies and/or client tasks that you wish to migrate. You can edit them before they're saved, and they're not automatically assigned to different groups of systems. When choosing between using either automatic or manual migration for moving over your legacy policies and client tasks, it really comes down to the complexity and scale of your environment as to which method you choose. If you have a smaller environment or one that isn't very complicated with a small number of policies and client tasks and a shorter system tree grouping, automatic migration would work just fine. But if you have a more complex environment with many different policies and many different system tree groups with different settings, manual migration is most likely going to be the method for you. In terms of differences between the functionality of the automatic and manual migration, there are only a couple different things, specifically with regards to some host IPS settings that only happen with the automatic migration that don't happen with manual migration. But aside from that, the main difference is that automatic migration does not migrate any unassigned policies, whereas manual migration, you can do any policy that you have in your policy catalog, and you can also edit the policies before they're saved. When it comes to the items that the Migration Assistant is capable of migrating from your legacy products to endpoint security, I'd really recommend reviewing the Endpoint Security Migration Guide that's available on docs.mcafee.com for more specifics. But essentially, it's able to migrate your policies from VSE, HIPS, and HIPS Firewall, Site Advisor Enterprise, Endpoint Protection, and VirusScan for Mac, and VirusScan Enterprise for Linux, in addition to client tasks from VSE and Site Advisor Enterprise. Following the information from the previous slide, this table shows a breakdown of how everything migrates over into endpoint security. So essentially, everything from VSE, Endpoint Protection for Mac, and VSE for Linux migrates over to the common and threat prevention modules of endpoint security. HIPS and HIPS Firewall will be split between the threat prevention and firewall components of endpoint security. Site Advisor Enterprise pretty much just goes straight over to web control. And the one caveat to keep in mind is that dotted line you see there for the auto migration only, and that's just the trusted IPS applications list that only migrates over when using automated migration. Now that I've covered the basics and other information about the Migration Assistant, I'll go ahead and show you how it works in practice with the demonstration. To get started with using the Endpoint Migration Assistant to migrate your policies, what we're first going to do here is perform an automatic migration. Now, as you can see here, if we look at the endpoint security threat prevention policies that we have assigned here just as a baseline for this specific group, we've only got the my default policy because I haven't changed the assignment for anything. Now, first thing you want to do is go to the Endpoint Migration Assistant page, and we're going to select Automatic Migration here, and we are going to select a specific group. We only have workstations within this group, so we're only going to migrate workstation settings. However, do keep in mind that if you have both workstations and servers in a group, you'll want to make sure to tick this box, and it'll create two policies, one for your workstations and one for your servers, and it'll assign them based on the machine type of the machines in question. Now from here, we just want to select the group that we're intending on migrating. And for the purposes of this, we're going to do demo group 1, which we do have a previous migration on, but that's okay. We'll hit next. And what that's going to do is create a new migrated VSE policy, as we've had a couple custom policies here. And that'll all go into just that on-access scan policy with all of the policy consolidation in ENS. We just hit save. It'll start a task. That should complete relatively quickly. Yep, it's already done. Now if we go back into the system tree, we can take a look at the assigned policies here for endpoint security threat prevention. We see that the migrated VSE policy is assigned. For the rest of the policies, it'll just be the McAfee default. And we see our migrated on-demand scan task. Now, if we wanted to do a manual migration of specific policies, for instance, if you have a significantly larger environment, anything more than just a very, very basic setup like what is in this demo here, you'd want to do a manual migration. So we're just going to focus on a few of these policies here that we've created here for the purpose of this manual migration. And it'll show us here what's going to be in that policy. Now I need to make this change, and we can see here the exclusion that I added in here for the purposes of this demonstration. So we just enter in a name for the policy, click Save, and then it'll ask you if you want to migrate another policy, so you can quickly do this back to back to back without having to go through the whole GUI every time. And we're going to select No because we don't need to, and we can see if we go into our threat prevention on access scan that we have this new policy that was created. That's really all there is to it. And it's a very similar process for migrating any client tasks manually. One thing that's very important to keep in mind when you're performing policy migration is that VirusScan Enterprise had a single policy that had two separate sets of settings for both workstations and servers. So when you go to migrate those policies, you have to select either to migrate only workstation or server settings or to migrate both into two distinct policies. Because of this, if you're planning on doing automatic migration of your policies, it's best to separate your systems, whether they be workstations or servers, into two distinct groups. That way, when the automated migration is performed, it only migrates the relevant policies and assigns them to the appropriate group. If you do have them mixed in one system tree group, you can just have it migrate both workstation and server, and that'll handle it. To summarize what we've covered about using the Migration Assistant, you have a few tasks that need to be performed. Number one is consider whether you actually want to migrate your policies or just create new policies from scratch with ENS. If you do plan on migrating your policies from VSE, consider based on environmental factors and the workload involved whether you want to use manual migration or automatic migration. If you are using HIPS, make sure to manually migrate your IPS policies. That way those carry over to exploit prevention as well. And once you've decided on the path that you want to take, actually perform the migration using either manual or automatic migration. And as I've discussed in a couple of my previous slides, definitely review the Endpoint Security Migration Guide, which goes into much greater detail on a couple of these various topics. A link is provided here. However, it's easily found by just Google searching McAfee Endpoint Security Migration Guide. The next step in the migration workflow is to perform a test migration on a small group of systems using the Upgrade Assistant. I think the best way to show this after already covering all the basic information is to just jump right into a demonstration, so we'll go ahead and do that. Now that we've analyzed the environment using the Upgrade Assistant and completed policy migration using the Migration Assistant, we can proceed with testing the deployment on a small subset of systems. So to do this, we just want to go back to the Upgrade Assistant. It leaves us where we were previously in the Prepare section with the versions that we've selected. And we can see here that now that we've migrated our policies, we don't have an error here or a warning here indicating that we still need to do that. We don't really need to worry about this conflicting deployments error here. In most cases, that can be ignored, but it's a good thing anyways to review your product deployments assigned to the product group. or the system group, just to make sure that you don't have anything that could potentially cause problems. And now that we've confirmed everything on this screen, we can move on to the deploy and track section. And for the purposes of this test demo, we're just going to do all systems eligible for upgrade automation. But we could also do one of these other two options if that was applicable to your environment. And you can also tag your systems, any of the systems that would be eligible for the automatic migration, and you can create your own deployment task based on that using the package creator, which we'll demonstrate a bit later. But for now, we're just going to click Create Deployment Task. We're going to give it a name. No parameters for that. You want to make sure that you have acknowledged the policy migration portion and that you have actually finished doing that. And we'll do this to run immediately since this is just a couple systems, but you absolutely can schedule it. Go ahead and hit save. Make sure you review the warning to make sure that you've configured everything correctly. Hit OK. And now we can view this deployment task and monitor the status as it goes. Now, from the endpoint perspective, we can go here and once the task has been built, and the agent on the machine receives the task, we'll see it pick up here. It'll start running that automated upgrade package. Now we're going to go ahead and wait for this to complete, and once it is, you will see that the currently installed VirusScan Enterprise will be replaced with Endpoint Security. Okay, so now as we can see, the migration has been successful on both test systems. Collect properties. We can see here, we've now got a McAfee Endpoint Security option here to open up the console. And as we can see, all three modules that we intended on installing in addition to platform have been installed, and the content has been updated. If we go back to EPO server on the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant page and we go back and view the deployment task once again, we can see that both of these systems are reporting as completed. And now finally, if we go back to reanalyze the environment, we'll see that these two systems went from ready to upgrade complete. And from an automated migration perspective, you'll just want to make sure that you evaluate all of the systems that were instructed to perform the upgrade, verify that they did complete the upgrade successfully, and that the product is functional on the end systems before moving to production.
Another method that can be used to perform the product migration is the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant package creator. It's a standalone tool that you run, and you can build what's essentially the upgrade automation package that the Upgrade Assistant creates for use with either EPO or your third-party deployment method of choice. It's fairly straightforward. The first step is to make sure that you have your Endpoint Security standalone installer package, which can be downloaded from either EPO or from the software download site, as well as the McAfee agent package from EPO. Once you've got those files ready, you just walk through the GUI of the package creator to create the package, and then you can either deploy it from EPO if you select that option, or from your third-party deployment methods such as SCCM. Now that we've covered the basics of what the package creator is, let's go through a demonstration of how it works.
Now for the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant package creator, it's fairly straightforward to use. The very first thing that it prompts you to do is to select your Endpoint Security Standalone Installer package. In this case, I'm going to be using the latest 10.7 update, which would be the September update at this point. Now, since we are using a 10.7 version, we don't also need to include the Adaptive Threat Protection installer. However, if you were using the 10.6.1 version, you would need to include that as it's a separate component. Now, in this instance, similar to creating your automatic upgrade deployment selection, you can configure which modules you want to install. So in this case, I'm just going to remove firewall and leave web control and ATP selected. You also need to select a McAfee agent package if you're intending on moving to a new EPO server by doing this deployment, or you just want to upgrade your agent in the process of doing it. And you can also select this option here to not upgrade the agent in the event that a compatible version is already installed. You can also select your additional products that you want to install, similar to the automated package, being DLP, DXL if you're using an earlier version of the agent, Active Response, and MACC if you want to do that. And we're not going to do any of those, so we'll just go ahead and hit Next. Now, here's a very important thing. If you're planning to use this with a third-party distribution method such as SCCM, obviously you'll want to select this box here. However, you can also select Deploy with McAfee EPO. So you can manage your deployment a little bit more, a little bit better, or in a more controlled manner than the automated deployment method through the Upgrade Assistant extension. Then you just select where you want it to output the package. We're going to be okay with just putting it at the desktop and configure a log location if you choose to do that. You can also include a version of McAfee SysPrep in this package, which is very important if you have some software that you know injects into applications on the system and the version of ENS that you're intending on installing doesn't have a new enough version of that. McAfee technical support can help determine if you might need that if you have some installation failures in your test group of systems. We also have some additional command line options here. In the vast majority of cases, it's not really necessary, but if you want to have a little bit more persistence, you could tick this retry after reboot parameter. After that, you just hit Next, and it'll provide you a summary of all the options that you've chosen on the prior screens. And then click Create, and it'll create the package. Now, for the purposes of time here, I've already created this package. And what you'll want to do next is check that package into your EPO repository if you are intending on doing an EPO deployment using the package creator. Now that that's done and we can see it in the master repository here, what we'll want to do is go back to the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant page. And I've reset this for the purposes of this demonstration here. And what I'm actually going to do here is select the different demo group, run the environment analysis. And as I mentioned in my testing automated deployment demo, what we can do here just select really anything, but what we're really trying to do here is utilize this automated tool just to tag the systems. So now if we go over to the deploy and track, we can just tag these systems. Now in this case it is just one system. But since we have that tag in place, what we can do now is create a new client task For our product deployment, create a new task. And select that package creator task, or that package creator product. Save there. And then specify send it only to systems that have that tag that was just created. So now you can create this deployment to any group that you want, specifically in any order that you want, so that you can phase out the deployment rather than doing it all at once, and schedule it however you choose. I mean, we're just going to do a run immediately here, but that is basically all there is to it. To summarize the testing phase of the migration workflow, you first need to test whether you can upgrade your device. So decide which devices that you want to perform the test on. An easy way to do this is just to select a small subset of the systems that show as ready for upgrade as a result of the Upgrade Assistant analyzation phase. Then you want to decide how you're going to perform the migration, whether it's using EPO with the EUA automatic deployment or using a third-party tool with a package that you've created using the package creator. Then you perform the upgrade on that small subset of systems, and then use the EUA to reanalyze the environment to ensure that those systems that you performed the upgrade on completed successfully and everything is good. Now we move on to the final phase in the migration workflow, moving to production. In this phase, we really just want to review what was performed during the testing portion of your migration and see if that's going to be applicable to the rest of your environment or if you need to make any other changes. The main deployment methods that you have available to you are using the Endpoint Upgrade Assistant to upgrade automatically. This is great because there's no need for user involvement. It's really just a set it and forget it type of thing. The main thing to keep in mind with this choice is the potential for overloading network capacity just because of the size of the package that's going to be pushed out to the systems. If you do choose to go this route and you have a larger environment, you would really want to make sure you select a randomization interval in the client task. That way, all of the clients aren't pulling down the package at the exact same time. Another option that you have available to you, and this would really only be applicable for small environments or for air-gapped environments, would be installing on individual devices using a package creator package. And obviously, this is great because you're not having to use the network at all. So that avoids that potential for failure. But obviously, this one requires the most amount of user involvement since you have to manually do the install. And the final deployment method that you have available is using either a third-party distribution tool or EPO to deploy out a package creator package. And this has similar benefits to the first method where there's not a whole lot of work involved in doing this. It's just creating the deployment task, whether that be through SCCM or a client task in EPO, and letting that go. Similar considerations need to be made as with the first one with regards to network restrictions or possible bandwidth limitations. And keep in mind that you'll want to make sure you follow local install type instructions if you're using a third-party deployment tool, as McAfee support might not be well versed in the deployment method that you choose to use other than EPO. If you encounter any issues during your migration or you just want more information, the Migration Assistant's landing page is a great place to go to. The Endpoint Security and Migration landing page provides all the information and resources you need to complete your migration in one central location. You can access it from the link on the screen, or if you just simply Google Endpoint Security Migration landing page.
The EPO Support Center plugin is available free of charge to download within your EPO application. You can learn more about the EPO Support Center on the McAfee Support YouTube channel and on support.mcafee.com. This concludes today's webinar. Stay safe, everyone.